I thought my cafe was done for. Then a mysterious investor saved me, and he had my past written all over him. My name is Lily, and I own a small cafe in the heart of Nashville. I always thought the world would bend a little for me because I was hardworking and creative, and I love the smell of fresh coffee beans in the morning. After my breakup with Jake, I was left with this cafe and a heart full of holes. I had opened Sweet Oak Cafe 6 months before the split. My dream was simple: good coffee, warm atmosphere, friendly regulars, and I thought Jake would be part of it in some way. He was my best friend first. We met in art class at college. Then we fell in love. Then he left me with nothing but regret. I blamed myself. I blamed him. I blamed the timing. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't taste the coffee the same. The cafe's chairs sat half empty, the counter piled with unpaid bills, the smell of stale pastry lingering in corners. One rainy Thursday, I sat at the back table with my notebook open and no words came out. My hands trembled as I sipped lukewarm latte. I thought, maybe I've lost more than a relationship. Maybe I'm losing myself. As the rain pounded the windows, I made a decision to fight. I would not let this cafe, my dream, vanish into a memory of heartbreak. I would rebuild. I didn't know how. I didn't know when, but I would. The next morning, I unlocked the doors and switched on the fairy lights overhead. The regulars popped in. Some asked how I was. I forced a smile, said I was fine. Inside, I felt broken. Then I heard a knock. I looked up and saw a man in a tailored blazer, dark hair, polite smile. His name was Max Langdon. He introduced himself as an investor looking for a cafe to back in Nashville. He said, "Your place has potential." I stared at him and wondered if this was a dream or a scam. He was calm. He was kind. He said he could help with funds, design ideas, staffing. He said he believed in me. I didn't believe in him. But maybe I should believe in the chance. I told him the truth. I was struggling. I told him I'd just come off a breakup and I was scared. He nodded and didn't look away. He said, "I want to see you succeed." We shook hands. I felt something shift. Later, I told myself it was hope. And I liked hope. But I told no one else about Max's offer. I tidied the counter, packed up the empty pastry boxes, switched the lights off. I walked to my car and I stared at the cafe in the dark. Could I trust someone new? Could I rebuild from scratch? I didn't know. But I felt a flicker of something. Possibility. Have you ever reopened your heart or a business after a major loss? The next morning, sunlight slanted through the windows and lit up the cafe like a promise. I arrived early, opened up, brewed a fresh pot of medium roast, put out fresh pastries. I remembered why I started this place. The smell of coffee filled me with that old spark. Later, Max arrived. He brought a folder of ideas, branding, menus, layout changes. He had sample mood boards, signage ideas, even suggestions for a live acoustic music corner on weekends. I felt overwhelmed and intrigued. We sat at a table in the corner by the window and he said, "Let's make this place yours, the way you always dreamed." I tell you, I felt tears. Not sad tears, but honest tears of relief. We sketched plans. He asked me what I wanted. I said I wanted it to feel warm. I wanted community. I wanted laughter. He nodded. He said, "Okay." The next week, we began renovations. We painted the walls in a soft sage green. Reclaimed wood shelves went up. Edison bulbs hung. Comfy chairs replaced the stiff stools. I watched the transformation, and the cafe began to feel alive again. I also watched Max. He arrived early, stayed late. He chatted with customers, asked opinions, made suggestions. I thought, he cares more than an investor. He cares like a friend. I reminded myself, don't trust too fast. But every time I looked at him, I felt a flicker of old familiarity I couldn't place. He was kind in a way that made me comfortable. The night we closed, we cleaned up together. He said, "You've got something special here, Lily. Don't give up." I nodded, exhausted but full of something. We said goodnight. I walked home feeling the ache in my muscles and the hope in my chest. The next day, a regular customer told me, "This place is changing in a good way." I smiled and said, "Thank you." Inside, I thought, I'm changing too. But I still held that question. Who is Max really? Why did he pick me? Why now? I tucked it away. I focused on the cafe. I focused on my dream. I focused on waking up each day and showing up. But I also noticed how Max's eyes lingered, how he listened when I talked about art and life. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself I was safe. I prepared the pastries, the latte art, the weekend open mic night coming soon. And I tried to ignore the part of me that remembered the other man, the one who left. But maybe ignoring wasn't enough. If someone offers to invest in your dreams, what questions would you ask first? Renovation week ticked by and it became both exhilarating and exhausting. I found myself laughing with Max when the painters spilled a bucket of paint all over an old rug. I found myself debating music selection for the open mic nights. I found myself lying awake at night thinking, can this really work? The cafe began to fill more often. People noticed the new shelves, the plants, the mood lighting. They noticed the difference and I noticed their smiles. I began to feel alive again. Meanwhile, Max and I shared coffee breaks. He asked about my art, my dreams, what I'd do if the cafe succeeded. He didn't push the subject of my breakup. I appreciated that. One evening, I stayed late finishing menu redesign and he said, "Here, take this." He handed me a pastry box from a special bakery. I laughed and said, "What's this?" He said, "For the long hours." The gesture felt personal. I swallowed a memory of Jake handing me something similar, same bakery even. I closed my eyes for a moment and let the nostalgia pass. I opened them and focused on the present. Then one Monday morning, I found in my inbox a contract. Investment agreement for a Sweet Oak Cafe, it said. I read it. Terms were generous. He would cover renovations, marketing, extra staff for 3 months. In return, I would share a modest profit and run the business with autonomy. I drew a breath. This was real. I called Max and we met again, signed the papers. I looked at his strong hand across the table. For some reason, I blushed. I suppressed it. Later that day, I locked the door after closing and I thought, this is a turning point. My cafe is reborn. I am reborn. But I also felt a low-level alarm. Trust is risky. I told no one about the contract except my best friend, Jamie. She looked at me and said, "Are you sure about him?" I said, "He seems genuine." She shrugged and said, "Just be careful." I nodded and felt grateful. That night I took a long bath, let the warm water soak my muscles, ran my fingers over the ring of commitment I still wore. Just a sentimental thing from before, no real meaning anymore. I closed my eyes and pictured the cafe full of laughter, full of possibility. The next morning I walked in and found Max already there, polishing tables. I smiled. He looked up. "Good morning, Lily," I said. "Good morning, Max." In that moment, something shifted between us. Not quite friendship, not quite business. Something unspoken. I looked away. I served coffee to a couple, and when I turned back, Max was gone. I wondered where he'd gone. I wondered what he was hiding. Would you sign an investment contract that gives you full autonomy but a partner in profits? The first open mic night arrived, and I felt both excited and terrified. I decorated a corner of the cafe with string lights and tiny plants. I arranged chairs in a semicircle around a small stage area. I asked local musicians to come and perform. As the evening began, people trickled in. The air smelled of coffee and fresh cookies and something new. I stood behind the counter watching everything, and when Max arrived, he greeted me with a quiet smile. He said, "This is going to be great." I nodded and nearly believed it. The first performer stepped up, a soft-voiced singer with a guitar. The mood changed instantly. I watched my cafe transform under warm lights, music flowing, lull of laughter, conversations. I felt the hum of life. After the performance, I collected tips in a jar marked, "Thank you for making this happen." Max whispered, "You did this." I smiled, but inside I felt something else. Fear. Fear that it could go wrong. Fear that the past could catch up. On my break, I went outside, breathed the cool night air, and leaned against the wall of the building. My heart raced. Max joined me. He said nothing at first, just stood beside me. After a moment, he said, "You're amazing, Lily. You don't give yourself enough credit." I looked at him and the streetlight lit his face. I thought, I know that face. But I forced it away. I said, "Thanks." He nodded, and we went back inside. As the night ended, I tallied the earnings and my heart soared. The cafe had new energy. I served the last customer, locked the door, and as I turned to go, I found Max waiting. He said, "Tonight was special." I said, "Yes, it was." He paused. Then he said, "I'm glad I met you when I did." I swallowed. I wondered what he meant. I asked, "Why did you pick me?" He didn't answer. Instead, he smiled and walked away. The next morning, I replayed that moment in my head. I told myself, don't overthink, just build. But I couldn't shake the feeling. There's more than meets the eye. I began to dig in. Old photos of the cafe, my memories of Jake, and I noticed overlapping shadows. My phone pinged with a message from Jamie. "Lunch tomorrow?" I said yes. We met and I told her about the night. She looked at me seriously. What if he's not who he says? I sighed. I said, "Maybe he is." "Maybe that's okay." She said, "Just trust your gut." I nodded. I wanted to. I really did. Have you ever watched something you built come alive in front of you? Midweek, I discovered a problem. A key supplier had raised their rates, a piece of kitchen equipment broke, and my savings were almost gone. I stood in the back storage room staring at the broken machine, the spare parts list, the mounting invoices. My dream felt shaky. I texted Max. "We have a problem." He came over within an hour. He rolled up his sleeves and asked, "What's happening?" I laid out the bills. He listened and then said, "Leave it with me." 2 days later, the supplier accepted our old rates and the equipment was replaced without extra cost. I watched in relief. I also watched Max quietly make calls, negotiate, and arrange things behind the scenes. I realized then, he's not just an investor, he's a partner. That thought scared me, because what happens when a partner becomes someone you care about? I pushed that aside. My focus returned to the cafe. We added new pastries, changed the signage, the regulars began to comment on the new feel of the place. I smiled at them and said, "Thank you for growing with me." Some nights I caught Max staring at me while I worked. I'd smile back and feel that flutter in my chest. I told myself it was gratitude. On Saturday, we had our busiest day so far. The cafe buzzed with families, students, musicians. The open mic corner filled early. I served latte after latte and the world seemed right. After closing, I walked through the empty chairs, the silent stage, the lights off, and I felt pride. Max joined me and said, "You should be proud." I expected a handshake. Instead, he hugged me gently. I froze. In my mind, I shifted away. When he released me, I said, "Thank you." He smiled and said, "I believe in you." I nodded. I told myself, just business. But I knew that wasn't true. That night, I tried to sleep, but my mind ran wild. Memories of Jake laughing, of our cafe dreams together, of betrayal, of the day he left. I wondered, did I ever really let him go? Or did I just bury the hurt? The next morning, I arrived early and found a small envelope on the counter with no name. Inside, a photo of the cafe in its first week. Me holding a cup and Jake standing next to me. I flicked the photo. I recognized the angle. I recognized the chair. I felt a pang. I stuffed the photo in my pocket, closed the envelope, and walked to the back to hide it. I told myself, I'll ask later. Or maybe I won't. For now, I'll keep rebuilding. When things start going right, does the past seem farther away? Or closer? Sunday afternoon sunlight poured through the cafe windows. I sat at a table with a notebook open and scribbles everywhere. I was planning the next shift, the new pastry launch, a weekend theme, acoustic and art. My thoughts drifted to Max. He arrived early and together we tasted new pastry recipes. He laughed when I got cream on my nose. I laughed when he teased me. I thought, this feels dangerous. Because laughter between us meant more than friendship. The bigger danger, he still didn't know I knew him. I'd started to connect small dots. The way he looked at art pieces, the way he remembered small details about me, the way his tie clip looked almost identical to one I had once seen on Jake. I shook those thoughts away. Focus, rebuild, move on. That evening, we prepared for the acoustic and art event. I invited a painter friend of mine to display a few pieces along one wall. The cafe glowed, we opened, and people arrived. The painter's canvases caught attention. The singer's voice floated. I stood behind the counter, poured cappuccinos, watched the scene. At one point, I glanced at Max. He was talking to the painter, his hand brushing a canvas. He turned and caught my gaze. He nodded. I nodded back. Then he slid away. I asked myself, what does he want? After the event cleaning up, I sat on a stool. Max handed me a cold bottle of water and said, "You did something incredible tonight." I said softly, "It felt like we did." He paused. Then he tucked a stray hair behind my ear. I froze. The gesture was gentle but heavy. My heart jumped. In the mirror above the counter, I saw my reflection and his silhouette behind me. I moved away. I said, "Thank you." He didn't push. He just smiled. That night, I drove home and couldn't stop thinking. The moonlight on the highway, the radio playing old songs, the ache of change. When I stepped into my apartment, I found a text. "Can we talk tomorrow morning?" M. I stared. I thought, his name is Max, so M stands for Max. I didn't reply right away. I thought, I want to know, I want to ask, but I'm scared. The next morning, I arrived at the cafe and Max was already there. He motioned me into the back office. I shut the door. He took a breath and said, "Lily, there's something I need to tell you." My heart pounded. I nodded. He said, "It's about me." My mind screamed. I looked at his eyes. I waited. When things feel right, do you want to question your gut or trust it? Max's words came slow and careful. "My real name isn't Max Langdon." I stared. My breath stuck. He said, "I came here under a different name because I needed a fresh start, and you needed someone who believed in you." I tried to speak, but nothing came. He continued, "I'm not just an investor. I'm someone from your past." My pulse hammered. I tilted my head. He said, "I'm Jake Morrison." The air went cold around me. Jake, the man who left, the man I thought I forgot. My world blurred. I sat down. Max, no, Jake, stood, his shoulders slumped. "I'm sorry," he said. My hands shook. I remembered him. I remembered the laughter, the betrayal, the goodbye. I remembered standing in this city with tears. I remembered selling everything, starting over. And now he was here. He said, "I watched you build this cafe from afar. When I realized you were in trouble, I wanted to help. And perhaps I wanted to show you that I could do better." I swallowed. I thought, why? My mind raced. Did I ever escape him? Did I even want to? He looked at me with eyes full of regret. I looked at him with eyes full of hurt. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked after a moment. "Because I didn't deserve your trust," he said. "Because you'd reject me." I closed my eyes and remembered everything. Then I opened them and said, "So you gave me help disguised in a lie?" He nodded. "Yes." I stood up. I paced the small room. The cafe's hum outside, chairs scraping, coffee machine steaming. I looked at him. "Is this business or is this you?" I demanded. He sighed. "Both." I felt anger and sadness and confusion all at once. He stepped forward. "I love you, Lily." I realized it too late. I left. "I hurt you. I'm trying to make it right." I laughed softly, bitterly. "So you broke me and now you buy me a cafe?" He winced. "I'm sorry." I felt tears rise. I asked, "What happens now?" He looked at me. "Whatever you want." I stared. I realized. The cafe, the heels of this business, everything blended with my heart. I had to decide. Can I forgive? Can I trust? Can I rebuild not just the cafe, but maybe us? I took a breath. I listened to the steam of machines beyond the door. I chose to leave. Walk outside under the neon sign of Sweet Oak Cafe. I stood for a moment and let the night air wrap around me. I thought, I am stronger than I was. I am not the girl who sat crying last fall. I turned and walked back in. I said to him, "We'll talk later. For now, I have a cafe to run." He nodded. I walked behind the counter and greeted a late-night customer. I poured coffee and I felt the cafe shift under me. I felt the story change. If someone you trusted lied about their identity but helped you, could you forgive them? The days after the revelation were strange. I saw Jake every morning in the cafe and felt everything all at once. I felt betrayal, relief, hope, fear. I kept things professional at first. I answered questions, scheduled staff, tasted pastries, greeted customers. He moved around quietly, helpful, respectful, giving me space. But the heart of the cafe pulsed with our shared history now. I found myself studying his gestures, the way he locked the doors, the way he asked for my opinion. I realized I never asked him for this help. It was his choice. I realized I never invited him back. He stepped in anyway. I wondered, why? One afternoon, I found a note on the counter. "For you, pick some time this week." No signature. I looked up. Jake stood by the door watching me. I folded the note and put it away. I didn't know what I would do. That evening after closing, I stayed behind. I poured myself a coffee and stared at the empty chairs. Jake knocked gently and came in. He sat across from me. He waited. I said, "Why are you here?" He looked at me calmly. He said, "Because I've missed you." I swallowed. I said, "You left me." He nodded. He said, "I know." I said, "Then you come back disguised. You invest, you move in, you make me rebuild." He said, "I know and I'm sorry. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want a chance." My eyes burned. I said, "What kind of chance?" He said, "To start over." With honesty this time, I looked away. The cafe hummed around us. I thought, are we rebuilding the cafe or rebuilding us? I thought, maybe both. I said, "I need time." He nodded. "Take all you need." Over the next week, I watched him work quietly. He didn't speak to me much outside business. We passed each other in the hallway. We exchanged nods. I watched my heart. One evening, I found old letters I wrote to myself when I started the cafe. Hopes, fears, dreams. I read them and realized how much I changed. I realized I didn't want someone who just rescued me. I wanted someone who come alongside me. I realized the cafe is not a charity case. It's my life. Jake knows that now. I also realized he needed to show up, not for redemption, but for support. The question, could I allow that? That night I closed early, locked the doors, walked to my car, and looked up at the sky. I whispered, "Lily, you're doing this by yourself too." I held that thought. The next morning I showed up and greeted Jake. He smiled. I nodded. We didn't talk, but the tension shifted. I was ready to see what came next. When someone returns under unusual circumstances, do you judge their motives or their actions? Weekend arrived and the cafe had a special event, Sunday brunch and live acoustic. I planned the menu, quiche, fresh fruit tarts, lavender lemonade. I worked the morning shift smiling at early risers. Jake arrived early too and helped set tables, refill sugar jars. The interplay between his help and my independence tugged at me. I wanted to say, stop helping. I also wanted to say, thank you. The brunch started smoothly. The air smelled of fresh bread and coffee. The live singer played, and couples, friends, families chatted. I watched a little boy spill his lemonade, and a waitress jump to clean it. I laughed. I realized, this is the life I wanted. After the crowd thinned, Jake approached me with 2 coffees and said, for you. I took one. I said, thanks. He said, you're doing an amazing job. I smiled because I believed it. Then he said, can we talk tonight, outside work? I nodded. I felt my pulse skip. Later I closed up and we walked to a small park bench across the street from the cafe. The city lights of Nashville glowed behind us. He looked at me and said, I wanted to show you something. He pulled out a photograph album. I opened it and found pictures of our college art class, our cafe when it was empty, our sketches of dream boards. I felt all the years sliding back. He said, I kept this. I never forgot. I said, why are you showing me this now? He said, because I want you to know that you mattered. My heart cracked. I stood up. I said, you broke up with me. You left me when I needed you. He lowered his head. I said, trust is earned, not given. He nodded. I said, and business isn't a cover-up for love? He looked at me. Quietly, he said, I'm not covering up anything. I'm trying to build with you. I looked away. The night air wrapped around us. I thought, maybe I'm ready to build. Maybe I'm ready to let someone in, but not someone who claims redemption, someone who acts redemption. I sat back down. I said, we'll take it slow. He smiled. That works. I looked up at the stars. I asked myself, is this second chance real or wishful thinking? I chose real. Do you believe actions speak louder than words when it comes to trust? Months passed and the cafe grew in ways I never expected. The community rallied, musicians returned, regulars came in with friends. I stood behind the counter one afternoon and realized I was laughing freely again. I spotted Jake at a table with a sketchbook, drawing ideas for a new mural on the wall. I smiled. I walked over. He looked up and said, hi. I said, the new mural for the west wall. What's the idea? He showed me the sketch, a tree with coffee beans for leaves, roots reaching into the community. I nodded. I love it. He shrugged with a quiet grin. I thought you might. That night we stayed after closing. We removed old pictures, cleared a wall, painted the tree trunk outlines. I held a brush. He held a ladder. We worked side by side. I felt the rhythm. At some point I turned and he was looking at me. I paused. I felt something gentle between us. I said, thank you for everything. He replied, thank you for trusting me. I realized we were building something bigger than a cafe. We were building trust. We were building hope. And maybe love again. Weeks later, I invited him to my apartment for dinner. I cooked something simple. He helped chop. I smiled at his quiet focus. After dinner, we sat on my couch and talked. He said, I know I can't erase what happened, but I promise I'm here. I said, I believe you. And I did. Because I watched him act. Because I watched the cafe grow. Because I watched myself change. One early morning, I unlocked the cafe. I looked at the fresh mural. I took a deep breath of the warm coffee air. I stepped behind the counter and filled a cup. I looked up and saw Jake standing in the doorway watching the first customer arrive. He smiled at me. I returned the smile. I thought, we did this. The cafe got us. Together. I knew there would be bumps ahead. I knew there would be tests, but I also knew this. A secret investor had come into my life. He turned out to be my ex, but we turned it into something honest. We turned loss into promise, and I turned my heartbreak into a new beginning. Have you ever turned what hurt you into something stronger?